Hi, this is Thomas Posen with MTL Electronic Music. Welcome to episode 1 of the Artist Interview podcast series. In this episode, I interview the Montreal DJ and producer Kridelka. We talk about his compositional process, the underground electronic music scene in Montreal, advanced production techniques, and the music culture more generally. You're in for a great episode, so let's get to it. Okay, so how did you get into producing electronic music?
Yeah, so I started when I was living in New York, 9, 10 years ago, and there was a really crazy studio at my school, and they let us kind of just use it the way we wanted. So every lunch break, every like free time I had, I was
This was
just
high
going
school
there.
or
No, middle school.
middle school?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah. And so I had a couple friends that were producing with me. We just kind of started there and moved back to Brussels. Kept making music there. Started DJing. Started getting like a residency at a club. That was pretty nice. Started making music with some of my friends that were like singing and doing other kinds of things. And then I moved to Sherbrooke. Kept doing music there as well. And then now in Montreal, I've really kind of found my genre, my style that I'm kind of interested. Found the really the direction that I'm trying to explore with my music.
Did that change from when you were in Brussels or?
Most definitely. I
Yeah?
was back in Brussels. I was doing Future House, which is kind of commercial,
Okay.
and now I've really found that what I really like is disco, house, and acid house.
What was it about Montreal that caused you to change your style?
Honestly, I think that I was exposed to a lot of different artists and exposed to a much more underground sound. I mean, I saw a lot of people playing vinyls, people playing older records, older tracks. And I feel like that kind of educated me and gave me a better sense of kind of the history of electronic music.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you felt like there was a richer underground scene or?
Well, I mean, when I was in Brussels, I was going out clubbing, right? I was like 16, 17, so I wasn't
Okay.
really exposed to that much underground kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I would probably have to say my first experience with underground house music was seeing Chami at the
Okay.
Bloody Louie in Brussels. That was just awesome. I'd never heard because the sound design. He started going in. He's one of the forefathers of Future House. But when I saw him there, he started going into G House, where he would take hip hop samples and go for a much darker, more violent, bassy sound. And that was really, I was like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is incredible. And that kind of led me to pursue more.
So you were kind of producing all the way from middle school to high school, university, and now today. At what point did you decide like this could be part of my future
Oh, I feel like I've wanted this for
forever?
forever. Yeah, since I started, I was like, this is awesome. I can think of a sound and I can make it.
Yeah.
Like sound design and all that kind of stuff. And I had a bit of a background in music as well. So,
What was your background?
so I was actually a semi-professional singer back in Europe.
Oh,
I was in a
really?
choir, yeah. And
Wow.
I did the Christmas gala at the Metropolitan Museum. Did a couple concerts at like different places. It was pretty nice, but basically I was a soprano,
Okay,
and
yeah.
my voice changed, and I
Yeah.
just didn't want to sing any other part than the highest part, and so I quit. I
Okay,
just
yeah,
couldn't
because
do
you
it.
yeah,
And
you
so
like the
I've,
melody.
yeah, and I've completely stopped singing since, and I found that producing was kind of my,
Okay, so that's where you developed your ear and kind of your music theory background and so forth.
mhm,
Wow, it's super fascinating. A lot of people come into electronic music from with like instruments, right?
mhm,
Or some people come straight from the computer world, but
yeah,
having a choir background, I guess that's European too. When like classical composers like Haydn
mhm,
were sang in choirs as choir boys, and then when their voices changed, they're blued out, of
yeah.
course. But that's great. Well, let's listen to your first track here. And what is this track?
This is Funk Trip Part 2. I've been working on
Amazing.
it for a while. There's some interesting sampling, some cool sound design, and I hope you enjoy.
All right. What is there anything in particular that we should listen for in this? Like,
The bass line was really inspired by Fred Falk and Alan Braxe, two
okay.
legends of French touch, French disco house,
Yep.
and I kind of added some maybe psychedelic elements.
Okay.
I think you're gonna
And
like it.
what how are the psychedelic elements expressed?
Oh wow! So I did some cool stuff in Serum. I used a wavetable, and then I
Okay.
automated the wavetable.
Oh,
So the
fascinating.
synth is playing a chord, and you'll hear it in the second part. The wavetable basically alternates between like 50 waveforms.
Okay.
And so it just sounds like I can't even describe it.
Yeah, you're
It's
changing the timbre of your main synth line.
with an LFO.
Okay, this is exciting. Let's give it a listen. Here we go. Damn. So that was Funk Trip number 2.
Yeah.
Fantastic track. I wanna go back and hear a little bit of this middle section here, where we have this. So we have a sampled sound. You have a vocals, right?
Yeah.
You're running it through a spectral resonator.
Yeah.
And then you're triggering the resonator. It's like a gate.
No. So I'm inputting like a pitch into it.
You're putting a pitch. Okay, so it's morphing the sample into that pitch,
Yep.
more or less.
That's it. And then there's also an LFO on the volume, which is
Okay.
why you were saying there was a
Right.
gate probably. That's
Right. Okay. And what kind of is it a sine waveform or
no. So I use the auto pan, and then I just make it. You can just change the phase between the
right?
two so that
Yeah.
it's the same. So
Yeah.
instead of being like a pan effect, it's actually just an LFO on the volume.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, but I mean, because you can change the pan to be like triangle waveforms or so or
Yeah. No,
sine. So
here
you're using a
it's
sine.
Yeah.
Okay. And then are you modulating the frequency of that sine wave? Or-
Yeah, that's it, and the amount as well.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's
And the
being
amount.
automated over time.
Okay. Okay. So we're gonna hear that right in the middle section right here. That's fantastic. Honestly, when I listened to Funk Trip number one, the was the acid line
Mm-hmm.
with this funky bass.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. So you're really combining subgenres.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed in Funk Trip 1, once after the second drop, once the acid bassline fades away, I then actually put the vocal through a vocoder, and the vocoder input is the acid bassline, is another
Oh.
acid bassline. And so it applies an acid vocoder onto the vocal, and that's what gives it this kind of like weird, you know what I mean, resonant
Yeah.
kind of sound on the vocal at the very end there.
Oh,
I don't know
that's
if you've ever noticed
oh
that.
man. Okay, so I'm gonna leave Funk Trip One. It's on the website, so definitely go check that out. Because we have another track we're gonna get to. But first, let's get back to some questions. So we just listened to Funk Trip 2, and we can see that your bass line and kind of your top end you're drawing from multiple subgenres. So what artists have really influenced you?
In terms of inspiration, I would have to say Dimitri from Paris.
Okay.
This was one of the first artists that I listened to that kind of explored like disco with some house elements,
Okay.
and that really kind of got me started on the whole disco thing. Also, Fol Amour, he's had a bit of mainstream success recently. He does some awesome stuff with sampling, kind of digging for some rare records, rare like disco records that you haven't necessarily heard of, and then sampling it and adding a whole lot of groove. Whole lot of like congas as well, like interesting
Yeah.
drums and stuff like that. I'm really inspired by that. And
Okay.
then lastly, probably Armin van Helden. He just has so many classic house hits all the way from like,
Yeah.
like the 90s or whatever to like now. And it's absolutely insane.
So you have like you have a somewhat nostalgic sound but it's also modern with you're using kind of
Mhm.
these modern effects that you couldn't have done probably in the era without really expensive gear.
Sure.
And so you're mixing this nostalgic vibe with a very modern aesthetic.
Hmm.
That's really cool. What you described a little bit about how you were using some of the spectral resonators and some of these other ideas and sort of like manipulating sounds with modern tools in Ableton and so forth. But you also start with a kind of a fundamental groovy, funky bass line. So but how would you say, where do you start? What's your compositional process?
So usually I like to have a chord and a bass line to start with. Sometimes I like to start with a sample and kind of see where that gets me. I love reharmonizing the sample because a lot of people, it's very trendy now to just take a cool disco song, right? Put a
Yeah.
kick on it, put the bass that just follows the bass, and then call it a day.
Yeah.
I think that if you cut out the low frequencies of a sample or you find a way to kind of extract the vocal, you can reharmonize it and make chords that are a little bit more, maybe not more interesting, but just a little bit different.
Yeah.
Just kind of add your
and
touch.
your own style.
Yeah, that's it. And I've been working a lot more on drums recently. I like to add some live drums. I love to sample drums from vinyls, like old. I'll usually layer some like electronic drums with some
Okay.
like old school drums. I have a sample pack where they sampled a bunch of vinyls. I have one where it's all
Amazing.
the Salsoul. I don't know if you're familiar with Salsoul Records, Salsoul
No.
Orchestra. They were a huge New York disco orchestra.
Okay.
And yeah, and so I really like kind of layering organic, right, and real
Yeah.
life drums with
I was thinking
electronic
from
stuff.
from a cultural perspective, you're sort of tying your own take into the history of it, right?
Mhm.
That's really interesting. All right, let's listen to another track. So what are we gonna hear now? Oops.
I guess Bound 303 is kind of better.
Bound 303?
Yeah.
Okay, so I hear 303. So are we gonna get some acid? Okay. What else?
You've definitely heard the sample from this because Kanye, who's a terrible person but a great composer,
Yeah.
he did Bound 2, where
Okay.
he famously samples Bound from Ponderosa Twins.
Okay.
Here, I didn't sample Kanye, but I did sample Bound, which I
Okay.
think is a great kind of old school soul like track. Ponderosa Twins +1. And yeah, I added my own spin on it. There's kind of a nice part when the beat drops. There's first just kind of the original sample that plays, and then my bass line. You really hear the reharmonization
Nice.
where my bass line kind of does its own thing.
Okay.
And I've been playing this at shows recently, and I've had a really good reaction from the crowd. People are like, "Oh, this is vaguely familiar. This isn't Kanye. Like, you know, what is this?" And people just go crazy.
Fantastic. All right, I'm excited. So this is Bound 303. Here we go. Whoa. So are your samples running through like a bandcast?
Yeah. Sorry, I put like an EQ. I removed like the bass and then.
Because if they were full and then you
Yeah.
bandpassed it to sound like it was in the same place as the original.
That's it.
And then you're also bringing your new elements and narrowing them and
And I do a lot of stereo stuff as well. I kept the sample kind of mono, the bass is obviously mono, and then the acid bass line is super good.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's really hard to fit in the mix, right? The acid bass line takes up a lot of space from the highs, the mids, the lows,
Yeah.
the mid.
Yeah, you've mixed in acid line as well. It's a huge amount of, I see what you mean by taking up a lot of space there.
Yeah, my mixing here's gotten like pretty good over the years.
Yeah.
So I feel like the two guys in Dilate are pretty happy that I've kind of helped them a little bit with the mixing and
Oh,
stuff.
good.
Big thing for me has been like frequency compression. I have there's TR Nova. It's a free compression plugin, but basically you apply the compression in bands. But it's like a visual. It's like a visual EQ.
It's like
EQA.
Pro
Like it's
MB?
compression. Sorry.
Is it like Pro MB?
Similar but free.
Okay.
Yeah. I think Pro MV is better because you can also saturate for bands.
Yeah.
Which is like fantastic.
Well, that's
Saturn.
That's Saturn.
Okay.
Yeah. I have the Fab filter suite. So.
Okay, wow, okay. Well, that's obviously better, but TR Nova's free.
Okay,
So that
yeah.
allows you to do the compression while seeing the bands.
Yeah.
You can also use it for sidechain.
Oh,
It's
okay.
amazing, because you sidechain your kick to the bass,
Yeah.
and you're only compressing your sub.
Right.
You put the main compression on the, what's it called, the fundamental,
Yeah.
and then you put a little bit more further, but it avoids getting that kind of cheesy, do you know what I'm talking about? The cheesy EDM sound when you just put a compressor
Full
on all
butt.
the frequency, then it's just
Yeah.
kind of like, it's too thumping. It just sounds like not good.
I think the sidechain, it's becoming more nuanced now
Yeah.
and especially about paying attention to your higher and lower
Yeah.
frequencies and how much you're pulling out and whether you want that effect or not.
Mhm.
And it's not just across the board. So that was Bound 303. Is that going to be released soon?
Yeah, so this is coming out in the Dilate Sampler Volume 1.
Okay.
Dilate is a new record label for those who haven't heard. We're launching with a couple of my friends, and we're playing at Francesco's Friday, if anyone's interested.
Amazing.
You can cut that out, I don't know
No,
when that's coming out.
No,
but-
it's fantastic. We're going to hear it live here this Friday, so that's great. All right, so let's get to some more questions here. Yeah, let's start with this one. What do you like about producing in live electronic music?
Honestly, I really like introducing people to new things that they haven't heard of. Acid house obviously is a little bit inaccessible in certain times, certain forms. A lot of the tracks are like very creaky, and there's a lot of high frequencies, and it's almost like too much.
Yeah,
Disco, on the other hand, is a little bit more accessible. Everyone
Yeah.
loves disco, right?
yeah,
And I think that combining the two allows me to both explore some older sounds, some older some older stuff,
yeah.
and combine it with something that's more modern. Although acid house has been around since the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So, but I really think that it's interesting for me to take inspiration from the past, from the history of electronic music, and try to do something that pays homage,
Yeah,
but is also kind of pushing the boundaries on what's next.
I think it's a compelling narrative, taking something that is, I suppose, when we talk about accessibility, I guess it doesn't maybe appeal to the person who listens to pop, and it's not clear exactly why, but it is a little more specific. It has like a very devout following,
Mhm.
but you recognize like there's something really amazing in this element of an acid bass line or an acid line.
Mhm.
And if you kind of hook it in and to a disco, then you can make people listen to acid lines, and they might enjoy it if they like disco.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And disco's also more than just accessible. It's also easy to dance to.
Yeah.
Like disco, a funky bass line, like your feet just start moving by their own volition. You know.
Oh
There's-
yeah. Yeah, I
It's,
mean, there's like disco is surely the predecessor of modern dance music with
Mhm.
Four on the Floor and the particular. It's amazing.
I Feel Love, Donna Summer.
Yeah,
It's the first house track. Right?
yeah, yeah. That's
Georgia
true.
Moroder.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah. So that kind of gets into this next question that we planned. Do you feel like there are any misconceptions about electronic dance music?
Right. I feel like some people think that electronic dance music is kind of basic and simple, and I feel like maybe you as well. We're trying to show that you can have educated electronic music that references quote unquote real music,
Yeah.
and that does have some like melodically interesting elements, or that isn't just a kick with a.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I do have a lot of respect for techno, but I would say that techno's the aspects of techno that are interesting are like sound design. You really
Mhm.
push the limits in terms of what you're able to make.
Yeah.
But I think that there's something interesting with combining kind of sound design and also like melodic elements
Mhm.
together to make something that looks forward and back.
Yeah, you make a really good point. I think some people think of it as simplistic,
Mhm.
and it's like, oh, it's a kick, snare, boots and cats, and then you actually try to make it, and you realize, oh, that snare does not work with this kick. Oh, this kick does not work. Like suddenly you're spending hours just even selecting a kick, even just a snare, and then that's just the very baseline. Like you must go much further than that, and the melody and the harmonic keys, everything. It's much more complicated than some people would characterize it as.
But there is a corporate electronic music, where people kind of have a formula and they just apply it and they do the same. And like I do
Yeah.
understand where this misconception comes to. There are definitely
There
some
are elements
artists
of
that,
yeah,
do you know what I mean? Just do the same
rinse and
thing,
repeat.
and it doesn't really have much of a soul. But I think that that's not an intrinsic quality of electronic music. I think that's more an issue of the kind of artists that are being promoted,
Yeah,
potentially
absolutely.
by media corporations and some
Yeah.
record labels. But
Yeah, so that's part. Yeah, that's one of the reasons the underground scene is so fun.
mhm.
Which that brings us to our next question. For people who want to listen to some of this new underground sound, what venues would you recommend in Montreal?
So for me, Francesco's has been a real game changer. They started playing a lot of disco house coming out of COVID, and I feel
Uh-huh.
like not a lot of places in Montreal were embracing the kind of disco and underground
Francesco's
house
is new,
vibes.
right?
Yep, yep.
It's
They
in the
just
old port.
opened. Yep, they just opened at the towards the end of COVID, I think.
Okay,
And they've been having some really great artists. I went to several of their shows. It's fantastic, and so now I'm playing there,
amazing,
which is pretty sweet. I'm excited to see how it goes.
awesome. So you have Francesco's and what are some other ones?
I really like Man Nécessaire. It's a bit of a different vibe. That's more like a vinyl bar, I would say.
Okay,
I really like it. They have the full Technic setup.
okay.
So I love to go there. I've been playing there occasionally, bringing my bag of vinyls. I'm just really excited that they're promoting and maintaining kind of the vinyl culture. There's not a lot
Hmm.
of places that do that. It's much
Yeah,
easier to just have CDJs or whatever, a digital setup, and you just bring your USB. It's kind of the
yeah.
easy way almost. And
It
then,
makes sense that you're drawn to that too,
yeah,
with your kind of connection to
for
the
sure.
historical EDM.
For sure, but it's very different. It's a very very different vibe. When I play at Manissasa, it's a lot more like disco, like old school, a bit
Is
of a house as
it does
well.
it
But
does it go from a restaurant into a dance night, or is it dance all night?
so
Is
it's
it
a
more of a
bar.
club?
There isn't that much dancing. It's a
Okay,
cocktail bar. It's a
okay,
tiki bar,
okay,
and but you really it's more like a listening experience, I would
okay,
say, than like a club.
okay.
And then my last one is probably Stereo. That's a bit more, I guess, on the techno side, but they've
Hmm.
been kind of promoting the underground dancing in Montreal for forever, right? So and they're a
Yeah,
staple.
yeah.
You
It's hard
know.
to lie with that. Or I mean, their sound quality is incredible.
Is incredible. Angel Moraes built these fantastic speakers for Stereo Bar and
Right, which are also at the
at the
sanctuary.
Sanctuary.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
those are incredible.
amazing. Okay, so let's move on to our last two questions here. Do you have any other artists that you would recommend people listen to, the underground Montreal artists?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of The Holy. He's been kind of transitioning towards some techno sonorities. I've just been a fan since the start.
Yeah, great
I
music.
saw him a few times DJing. He played at Francesco's for a release party. It was completely packed.
I bet.
Awesome. I'm a big fan of Fabricate as well. I
Okay.
saw The Holy and Fabricate at Igloo Fest, and they completely killed it. Fabricate is really into the disco house vibe, so I'm really appreciative of that. And they've been around for a while, making some bangers. I'm also a big fan of the
The
Fellas
fellas.
Q-Tips.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They're a really important part of the Montreal vinyl scene. They've
Uh-huh.
been pushing like vinyls, playing at Barbosa, playing at a
Yeah.
bunch of places, bringing
They
the
do
old
disco house
school.
as well, right?
Yeah, they
Okay.
do, and more regular house as well. But it's really fantastic. Mathis Moretti, who's one of the fellas, he's been releasing some massive tracks that also incorporate some acid house
Oh
elements
really? Okay.
into like disco house. I'm really a huge fan. Yeah.
Amazing.
And lastly, I also have to plug, of course, Dilate.
Yeah.
So that's Christoph and Kian. We're launching a record label together. These guys are fantastic.
Amazing.
They're really good producers. We have a lot of unreleased stuff that we're working on. I'm really excited to be able to work with them.
Then what's their name again? Dilate?
Dilate.
Dilate. Okay, great. And for those out there that are new to this or looking to get into producing or DJing or live electronic music, do you have any advice?
I would get a simple keyboard controller that comes with like an intro version of Ableton Live, and I would just get to it. I would just get started with your headphones. You don't even need like a fancy setup or any
Yeah.
of the expensive plugins. There's tons of free resources online. There's
Yeah.
tons of tutorials online. Tons of like free samples. You can really get started with a low budget, and I think what you really have to do is just start making music.
Yeah.
That's really the way that you progress, is just making a bunch of music. And maybe it's not the best at the start, but you just gotta
Yep.
keep making.
You're gonna have to
That's
make a
it.
lot of bad tracks.
That's it. Before you get somewhere.
And it's worth it. I think it's just about sticking into it,
Mhm.
and it turns into something great. The best way to start is to start.
That's it. That's it.
Well, fantastic. So we had Kridelka, and MTL Electronic Music. So thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it.